Imagine this. The ground beneath you has started to tremble, not from an earthquake that splits the earth, but from something quieter and far more devastating: the collapse of every meaning you once trusted. You don't hear buildings falling. You hear silence, the kind that comes when the gods vanish, when the heavens shut their doors and the prayers evaporate into nothing. Nietzsche warned us more than a century ago. Europe, with all its culture, all its brilliance, was already rushing toward catastrophe like a river straining to reach the sea, violent, restless, afraid to reflect. And here we are, his prophecy blooming in our own time. You need to listen to the end of this story because it isn't just philosophy, it's the script we are living right now. What he described as the advent of nihilism is no longer an abstract theory. It is the air we breathe, the headlines we scroll, the unease that keeps you awake at night. Stay until the last word because this isn't only about Nietzsche's diagnosis of meaning collapsing. It's about whether there's a way out. Whether life can still be affirmed when the old gods are dead and the old values hollow. This story runs through despair, through the collapse of direction, through the figure of the last man, who shrinks life down to mediocrity. And it ends, if we're strong enough, with the possibility of something else, something greater, the revaluation of all values, the birth of the one who can gaze into the abyss and not flinch. Picture Europe in the late 19th century. The churches still stood, the priests still spoke, the rituals still continued. But Nietzsche could already hear the echoing hollowness inside. Science was tearing down the heavens. Darwin was unseating humanity from its throne. Industrial capitalism was grinding people into anonymous cogs. The world no longer felt anchored to any eternal order. To most, life looked the same. To Nietzsche, it was like walking on ice that was already cracking, knowing the water below was waiting. He was not only a philosopher. He was a seismograph, registering tremors that would become the earthquakes of the next centuries: wars, genocides, totalitarian ideologies, and the soft emptiness of consumer culture. He said, "I am telling you what will happen because it can no longer be otherwise. Nihilism is coming." But what is nihilism? It is not merely pessimism, not simply sadness or cynicism. It is the recognition that the world as we once imagined it carries no intrinsic meaning, no value, no higher purpose. It is the radical repudiation of all we thought desirable, sacred, unquestionable. The ground beneath is gone, and we are floating in an infinite nothing. Nietzsche called it the most unsettling of all guests, because it comes uninvited, sits down in the middle of our lives, and refuses to leave. And the terrifying truth is, we cannot simply throw it out. We must learn to live with it, or die under its weight. You have to understand, Nietzsche wasn't writing about something abstract. He saw three distinct faces of this guest. First, nihilism as despair. That's the Schopenhauerian voice whispering that life is mostly suffering, that pain outweighs joy, that existence itself is a mistake. He compared life to a pendulum swinging endlessly between pain and boredom, with only fleeting sparks of pleasure. For Schopenhauer, the only reasonable response was resignation, wishing never to have been born. Buddhism echoed this, though with a different path: detachment, the attempt to liberate oneself from the wheel of suffering, to step off the carousel of existence. Nietzsche understood the temptation but rejected it. He insisted, remain faithful to the earth. Don't escape, don't negate. Yet he saw in both Schopenhauer and Buddhism the seeds of nihilism, despair disguised as wisdom. Second, nihilism as disorientation. This one is subtler. Christianity, with its promise of salvation beyond this world, once gave meaning. Heaven was the compass point, the treasure waiting at the end of suffering. But once the age of enlightenment cracked open that narrative, once science showed us a godless cosmos, once reason questioned miracles, the promise collapsed. And then came the parable of the madman. God is dead. God remains dead, and we have killed him. Not a celebration, but a lament. What were we doing when we unchained the earth from its sun? Where are we moving now? Is there any up or down? Are we not straying through an infinite nothing? Here lies the disorientation. The maps are burned, the compass is broken, and humanity staggers without direction. Christianity once answered suffering with redemption. Without it, people wander as if blindfolded in a desert. Third, nihilism as mediocrity. This is the face Nietzsche feared most. Not despair, not confusion, but the flattening of existence into small comforts. He called this figure the last man. Imagine him, blinking, complacent, sipping cocoa from his branded mug, content with entertainment, warmth, and low stakes. We have invented happiness, he says, satisfied to avoid risk, ambition, or greatness. He doesn't despise himself. He doesn't aspire beyond himself. He is safe, comfortable, mediocre, and in Nietzsche's eyes, despicable. Because this form of nihilism doesn't ache or seek, it simply shrinks. The last man is the triumph of triviality over tragedy, and Nietzsche saw him as the endpoint of our trajectory. You see why this matters? Because all three forms are still alive around us. The despair of people convinced life is suffering without worth. The disorientation of those lost after the death of God, who no longer believe but still cannot let go. The mediocrity of a culture that confuses comfort with meaning, consumption with purpose. This is not philosophy class. This is our world. And Nietzsche, like a dark prophet, is still whispering that this is only the beginning. But he didn't stop at diagnosis. He asked the harder question, can we overcome nihilism? Not just patch it, not just run from it, but move through it to the other side. That is why you must listen to the end, because buried in Nietzsche's darkness is also the glimmer of something else. The Übermensch, the one who creates new values when the old ones crumble, the one who looks into the abyss and says yes. This is part one. You've seen the warning, the arrival of nihilism, the first glimpses of its three faces. But the descent goes deeper, and the question gets sharper. Next, we'll walk further into Nietzsche's night, through the madness of a godless world, through the allure of resignation, through the temptation of comfort, and into the possibility of a life that can affirm itself without any heaven, without any beyond. Stay? Because the end of this story is not despair, it is the possibility of something greater. The night grows darker the deeper you go, and yet you cannot turn away. The first truth was the prophecy. Nihilism is coming, like a tide. But now the tide has reached your feet, and you feel its coldness. This is where despair begins. Not the theatrical despair of tragedy, but the quiet, suffocating realization that existence itself might not be worth it. The thought creeps in slowly, like water seeping under the door. Maybe life is nothing but suffering. Maybe the brief sparks of joy are only illusions, fireflies before the storm. Maybe it would have been better never to be born. This is the whisper of Schopenhauer, the philosopher who painted existence as a cruel joke, a pendulum swinging endlessly between pain and boredom. Think of that pendulum. On one side, pain, hunger, loss, humiliation, sickness. On the other, boredom, the yawning emptiness when desire is briefly satisfied, leaving us restless for the next craving. Back and forth, and the movement never ends. There is no stillness, no peace, only the rhythm of dissatisfaction. A life like this, Schopenhauer insisted, is fundamentally a mistake. The logical conclusion: the greatest gift would have been never to exist. And if existence is unavoidable, then the closest thing to salvation is to deny it, to detach, to stop wanting, to let go. This is why Schopenhauer was drawn to Buddhism, with its doctrine of liberation from the cycle of birth and suffering. The Buddhist sage sees the same endless wheel, the samsara, the world of craving and pain, and chooses to step off it, to renounce desire, to embrace detachment, to dissolve into nirvana. It is not hatred of life so much as weariness, a deep fatigue with the relentless burden of existence. And millions have felt the temptation of this wisdom, to reject the world, to call it empty, to long for nothingness. But Nietzsche saw in this a hidden poison. He understood the temptation of despair, but he called it what it was: a betrayal of the earth, a will to nothingness disguised as wisdom. To say life is not worth living is to spit on the very ground that gave you breath. To long for nothing is still to long, but for the most dangerous thing, annihilation. He accused Schopenhauer and the Buddhists of turning their backs on existence, of letting disgust with life masquerade as truth. For Nietzsche, despair was not a solution. It was a sickness, a collapse, a way of looking away from the sun because its light hurts your eyes. And yet despair is powerful, seductive, because it promises relief. Imagine the addict who says, "If life is nothing but suffering, then why struggle? Why not sink?" Imagine the weary soul who says, "I am tired of this endless chasing. I would rather have nothing than keep chasing shadows." Despair speaks softly, but it speaks to the deepest exhaustion in us. That is why so many find it convincing. It is not stupidity, it is the logic of pain. But Nietzsche insists, despair is still nihilism. It values nothing, and in valuing nothing, it robs life of all affirmation. Worse, it becomes contagious. A culture that embraces despair breeds passivity, resignation, weakness. Schopenhauer's disciples would never create, never strive, never fight for beauty or greatness. They would sit in quiet negation, content to see life as an error. Nietzsche spat at this. He wanted us to remain faithful to the earth, to this soil, to these bodies, to this struggle. To despair is to betray yourself before you even begin. And yet, don't rush past this. Because despair is not only a philosophical argument. It is an experience. You have felt it. The hospital room where a machine keeps breathing for someone you love. The morning you wake and wonder why you should rise at all. The silence after the phone call that ended everything. In those moments, the pendulum is no metaphor. It is your pulse, your breath, swinging back and forth between pain and emptiness. You don't need Schopenhauer to explain it. Your own life has explained it to you. And if you've ever felt it, then you know the temptation to give up, to call existence a mistake. That is why despair is so dangerous. It doesn't live in books. It lives in us. And it is here that Nietzsche's refusal matters most. He does not deny the reality of suffering. He does not sugarcoat it, does not preach optimism. He looks straight at the pendulum, straight at the wheel of samsara, and says, yes, this is true. Life is full of pain, but that is not enough to condemn it. To live, he insists, is to affirm even this. To embrace existence, not by denying its pain, but by loving it in spite of everything. Remain faithful to the earth. That was his command. Do not seek refuge in a beyond. Do not call life an error. Do not flee into nothingness. Stay. Why? Because despair may look like truth, but it is still a trick. To say life is suffering is only half a truth. The other half, the half despair ignores, is that suffering can also create. Pain forces us to grow, to change, to struggle, to become. Without pain, there would be no art, no greatness, no love worth fighting for. The pendulum swings, yes, but the movement itself creates rhythm, music, life. To escape, it would be to escape humanity itself. This is why Nietzsche despised the ascetic ideal. The monk who renounces, the saint who denies, the philosopher who calls existence a mistake, all of them were, to him, refusing life. They were saying no to the very thing that gave them breath. To Nietzsche, even a flawed affirmation was better than a polished denial. Even misguided values were better than none. Despair was not only weakness, it was betrayal. And here is the part you must hold on to. Despair is only the first mask of nihilism. If you stay with me, if you don't look away, you will see that beyond despair lies something even more unsettling. Disorientation. When the gods are gone, when heaven is silent, when the compass no longer points north, what then? This is where we go next. But you must listen all the way through, because this descent is not just philosophy. It is the map of our time. It is your map. For now, remember this. Despair is seductive, but it is still nihilism. To call life worthless is to blind yourself to its depths. Nietzsche knew, the abyss is real, but so is the earth. The pendulum swings, the wheel turns, but you are here. And as long as you are here, the only true betrayal is to refuse to live. You have felt the weight of despair, that suffocating whisper that life itself might be a mistake. But despair, as heavy as it is, still leaves one orientation, away from life, toward nothingness. It is a no shouted into the face of existence. Yet what if there is no longer even a clear no or yes? What if the compass itself has shattered and we no longer know where to turn? This is the second mask of nihilism, disorientation. And it is more terrifying than despair, because here there is no direction at all, only drift, like being cut loose from gravity and spinning in an infinite void. This is the madness Nietzsche described with brutal clarity in the parable of the madman. Imagine a man rushing into the marketplace with a lantern in broad daylight, shouting, "I seek God! I seek God!" The crowd laughs at him. Has he gone insane? But he does not stop. He says the unthinkable. God is dead. God remains dead. And we have killed him. And suddenly, the laughter dies, because the words hang heavier than any sermon. He asks them, what were we doing when we unchained this earth from its sun? Whither is it moving now? Whither are we moving? Away from all suns? Are we not plunging continually? Backward, sideward, forward, in all directions? Is there still any up or down? Are we not straying through an infinite nothing? This is not poetry. This is diagnosis. For thousands of years, God, or the idea of God, was the axis around which Western life revolved. Heaven gave meaning to suffering. The commandments gave direction to morality. The promise of redemption anchored existence. Even if life was cruel, one could endure, knowing that justice and bliss awaited beyond. But with the Enlightenment, with the rise of science, with the slow erosion of faith, the axis broke. We unchained the earth from its sun, and now we drift. And Nietzsche warned, the death of God is not just the loss of a belief. It is the collapse of the structure of meaning itself. Without God, without a beyond, what tells us what is good? What gives suffering a purpose? What makes sacrifice noble, or justice binding, or love eternal? Without that axis, everything begins to blur. Up and down lose their meaning. The compass needle spins. That is why the madman asks, is there still any up or down? Think of the feeling of vertigo. You look down from a great height, and suddenly your body doesn't know whether it will fall, whether the ground is solid, whether the horizon is trustworthy. This is what Nietzsche means. The modern world, after the death of God, is in vertigo. Some cling to the remnants of faith, but the conviction is gone. Others flee into science, but science, while powerful, cannot tell us why to live, only how life functions. Others sink into distraction, into entertainment, into politics, into ideology. But beneath it all is the same dizziness. The center is gone. And if you think this is only abstract philosophy, look around you. The headlines, the endless feeds, the fragmentation of belief. People cling to ideologies like lifeboats, invent new cults of identity, throw themselves into nationalism, consumerism, conspiracies, anything to give them a sense of ground. Others wander, hollowed out, without direction, numbing themselves with noise. Anxiety, depression, alienation, they are not just personal struggles. They are symptoms of disorientation, the same diagnosis Nietzsche gave over a century ago. The danger here is different from despair. Despair still had clarity. Life is suffering, better to renounce it. But disorientation offers no clarity, only confusion. You don't know whether to renounce or to affirm, whether to flee or to fight. You are tossed about by every new current, every new voice, every new promise of salvation. That is why Nietzsche's parable is so haunting. The madman cries out not only that God is dead, but that we killed him. We ourselves destroyed the axis, with our hunger for truth, our devotion to science, our refusal to accept illusions. And now, with the ground gone, we stumble. What festivals of atonement? The madman asked. What sacred game shall we have to invent? He knew that humans cannot live without meaning. When one sun dies, we will try to light another. When God collapses, we invent ideologies, utopias, mass movements. But he also knew that these new suns may be false lights, dangerous lights. The 20th century proved him right. People sought salvation in communism, in fascism, in nationalism, in consumerism, in endless wars. They tried to replace God with history, with race, with progress, with the market. But each attempt carried its own disaster, because none of them truly answered the question of value. Listen closely. This disorientation is not behind us. It is here now. When you scroll through your phone late at night, when you feel the gnawing sense that none of it matters, when you cannot tell which voices to trust, you are living Nietzsche's prophecy. The earth is unchained. The compass needle spins. And the worst part is, many do not even realize it. The crowd in the marketplace laughed at the madman. They thought him insane. Only later did they realize he was the only one who saw clearly. But Nietzsche also knew, we cannot simply go back. The death of God is irreversible. Once science, once reason, once history has exposed the cracks, we cannot unsee them. Faith cannot be patched back together once it has been dissolved by skepticism. We cannot pretend the center holds. That is why he said, we must become gods ourselves to appear worthy of the deed. Not literally divine, but creators of new meaning, new values. Because without that, disorientation consumes us. Ask yourself, have you ever felt it? That floating, that sense that nothing is certain, that you are moving but you don't know where? That is not just personal anxiety. It is the condition of the age. It is the shadow of the death of God. Nietzsche felt it in his bones. Walter Kaufmann, the great interpreter of Nietzsche, said he experienced in advance the agony of a godless world. He lived its despair, its dizziness, long before most even knew it had arrived. He was the seismograph, trembling with the quake before the earthquake came. And so we face the same question the madman posed. How shall we comfort ourselves, the murderers of all murderers? What water is there to wash away this blood? The truth is, there is none. We cannot undo the act. We cannot resurrect the old gods. We can only move forward into the disorientation. And this is why you must stay with me to the end, because beyond the vertigo lies something else. a new possibility, but only if we dare to walk through the nothingness without flinching. For now, hold this image, a world spinning without a sun, without an axis, without a compass. Humanity drifting, inventing false lights, chasing false dawns, grasping at meaning and finding smoke. This is nihilism as disorientation, and it is the condition of modern life. But it is not the end. Stay with me, because the descent goes deeper still, to the most chilling form of nihilism, the one Nietzsche feared above all, not despair, not confusion, but the slow, suffocating comfort of mediocrity. The last man, the one who no longer despises himself, because he no longer dares to reach for anything higher. The one who says, "We have invented happiness," while blinking in the twilight. We are not there yet, but we are close. You might think despair is the darkest night, that disorientation is the most terrifying fall. But Nietzsche tells us there is something worse, something quieter, more insidious, a world where people no longer despair, no longer feel lost, no longer search at all. A world where they are content with small pleasures, satisfied with mediocrity, where they blink and call it happiness. This is the figure of the last man. And Nietzsche shuddered at the thought of him, because he saw that this was where Europe was heading, not into tragic collapse, but into comfortable suffocation. Picture him. The last man does not rage, does not despair, does not even look for God. He shrugs. He sips his drink. He settles into his couch. "We have invented happiness," he says, blinking lazily, as if happiness were a blanket purchased at the store, as if the highest goal of existence were warmth and entertainment. He avoids risk. He avoids pain. He avoids greatness. Because greatness requires suffering, risk, danger, and he wants none of it. He wants only safety, comfort, predictability. Nietzsche paints him with cutting irony. The last man no longer gives birth to stars. He no longer asks what love is, what creation is, what longing is. He blinks. The earth has grown small, and the last man hops upon it like a flea beetle. He lives long, because he does not dare to live deeply. He avoids poverty and wealth alike, because both demand effort. He avoids ruling and obeying alike, because both require struggle. He works, yes, but only because work distracts him. He loves, perhaps, but only because closeness warms him. He is content to graze in the field of mediocrity. You have met him. Perhaps you have even felt him in yourself. The moment you choose the easy distraction over the difficult task, the moment you say, "This is fine, this is enough," even though you feel a hunger for something more. The last man is not a monster. He is ordinary. That is what makes him terrifying. He is not despairing. He is content. He is not lost. He is comfortable. He does not suffer. He drifts. And in his drifting, he has lost the very thing that makes life worth living. The striving for higher values, for greatness, for beauty, for creation. Nietzsche feared this more than the death of God. Because despair can be overcome. Disorientation can give birth to new values. But mediocrity? Mediocrity suffocates slowly. It kills not with a sword, but with a cushion. The last man does not even realize he has lost anything, because he has lowered his standards until nothing is missing. "We have invented happiness," he says. And who can argue with him? He is comfortable. He is safe. But his comfort is the grave of the human spirit. Look around. Isn't this already here? We live in a culture of endless entertainment, endless consumption, endless distraction. Comfort is sold to us as the highest goal: better couches, bigger screens, safer routines. People blink at their phones, blink at their shows, blink at their feeds, and call it happiness. Risk is avoided. Struggle is shunned. Excellence is mocked as elitism. Creation is replaced by consumption. We no longer despise ourselves because we no longer dare to see what we could be. This, Nietzsche said, is the most despicable state, not because people are wicked, but because they are small, because they are satisfied with the lowest pleasures when the highest values are still possible. The last man does not hate life, he cheapens it. He does not deny existence, he flattens it. He does not despair, he blinks. And his blinking spreads, generation by generation, until the stars themselves are forgotten. Why is this worse than despair? Because despair at least acknowledges the depth of suffering. Disorientation at least acknowledges the loss of direction. Both contain the possibility of rebirth. But mediocrity acknowledges nothing. It is a quiet death, a slow suffocation, the silence of a species that no longer aspires. Nietzsche said, "The last man is the ultimate form of nihilism, because he has adjusted his standards so far downward that he can meet them easily, and in meeting them, he believes he is happy. But his happiness is small, fragile, counterfeit. It has no star, no horizon, no depth. Stay with me here, because this matters. You are surrounded by temptations to become the last man. Every advertisement, every feed, every promise of convenience whispers, rest, relax, be content, don't struggle, don't reach, don't question, just blink." But Nietzsche's voice still cuts through the noise. Alas, the time is coming when man will no longer give birth to a star. He saw it, he named it, and he warned us. This is the most dangerous form of nihilism, because it does not feel like nihilism at all. It feels like peace. It feels like happiness. And by the time you realize it is emptiness, it is too late. And here is why you must keep listening. Nietzsche did not stop at this nightmare. He did not leave us with the last man as our destiny. He demanded that we go further, that we refuse the comfort of mediocrity, that we create new values strong enough to replace the dead ones. He demanded the birth of the Übermensch, the one who affirms life fully, who creates stars again, who loves fate instead of fleeing it. But we are not there yet. First, you must see the danger clearly. Despair tempts you with renunciation. Disorientation tempts you with confusion. But mediocrity tempts you with comfort. And comfort is the softest grave. Stay with me, because after this comes the question that cannot be avoided. If the old values are dead, if despair and mediocrity are traps, then what can we do? What can possibly replace the collapsed order? What values can we create? Nietzsche's answer is dangerous, demanding, but also the only hope he saw. Do not look away, because what comes next is the real test. The possibility of overcoming nihilism itself. So far, we've walked through the ruins. We've seen despair, the dark truth that suffering outweighs pleasure. We've seen disorientation, the vertigo of a world where God is dead and the ground has vanished beneath our feet. We've seen the suffocating comfort of the last man, blinking contentedly in the dim light of his own mediocrity. This is the landscape of nihilism, and Nietzsche knew it intimately. But he did not remain there. He asked the most dangerous question of all. If everything collapses, if every old value is hollow, what now? This is where his philosophy turns from diagnosis to creation. Nietzsche tells us, the point is not simply to lament the death of God, not simply to expose the emptiness of our comforts, not simply to despair over suffering. The point is to go through nihilism and out the other side. To smash the idols, yes, but not to sit among the ruins. To build, to create, to affirm life in its entirety, even the parts that make us shiver. He calls the one who achieves this the Übermensch, often mistranslated as Superman, but the idea is stranger, richer, harder. The Übermensch is not a caped hero. He is the human being who has gone through the abyss of meaninglessness and come back not with resignation, not with mediocrity, but with a fierce yes to life. He creates his own values. He does not cling to the old ones, nor does he wallow in their destruction. He does not beg for redemption beyond this world. He affirms this world, this earth, this body, this suffering, this joy. He loves it so deeply that he would live it again and again, eternally. Here we encounter Nietzsche's most haunting thought experiment, the eternal recurrence. Imagine a demon whispering in your ear, "This life you now live, you will have to live again, infinitely many times, in every detail. Every joy, every pain, every mistake, every triumph, again and again, forever." Would you collapse in despair, or would you embrace it? This is not a doctrine. It is a test. Can you say yes to life so fully that you would repeat it endlessly? That you would embrace not only your triumphs, but your failures, not only your pleasures, but your suffering? To Nietzsche, only the strongest spirit could say yes. Only the Übermensch. And here lies amor fati, love of fate. Not resignation, not reluctant acceptance, but love. To want nothing to be different, not forward, not backward, not in all eternity. To look at your life, with all its scars, and say, yes, again. This is not an easy love. It is the hardest. It means taking the abyss and making it your home. It means taking suffering and saying it was worth it. It means no longer wishing for another world, another life, another self. It means saying yes to this one, completely. Nietzsche's will to power is often misunderstood as domination over others. But its deepest meaning is mastery of oneself, the expansion of one's strength through overcoming resistance. Every obstacle, every suffering, every challenge is not something to avoid, but something to grow through. To fight, to struggle, to transform, that is the will to power. It is not about crushing the world. It is about shaping yourself, becoming who you are, not shrinking into the last man's blanket. Now, pause and see how radical this is. Most philosophies of Nietzsche's time tried to soothe, to console, to offer a balm for suffering. Nietzsche refuses. He does not tell you suffering will end. He does not promise redemption in another world. He does not say happiness lies in comfort. He tells you the opposite. Suffering is inseparable from life, and it is only through embracing it, affirming it, that you can rise. Not escape it, not numb it, not reject it, embrace it. Say yes to it. Transform it into strength. This is why Nietzsche is not a nihilist, though he saw nihilism clearer than anyone. He was the philosopher who stared into the abyss and refused to blink. He was the thinker who saw the death of God not as the end, but as the beginning. He wrote with a hammer, breaking the idols of false values, because he believed we could build new ones, stronger ones, born not of fear, but of affirmation. He wanted us to become creators, not followers, to live dangerously, not comfortably, to become worthy of the freedom that comes when the old certainties die. Look at your own life. Where have you avoided struggle, hoping for comfort instead? Where have you wished fate were different, instead of learning to love it? Where have you consumed instead of created, blinked instead of dared? These questions are not meant to condemn, but to awaken. Nietzsche's challenge is not abstract. It is immediate, personal, visceral. He is not speaking to mankind in general. He is speaking to you. Can you affirm your life? Can you bear the eternal recurrence? Can you love your fate? Nietzsche knew most could not. Most would prefer comfort, safety, distraction. Most would prefer the last man's blink. But he believed some, perhaps only a few, could rise to the challenge, could take the abyss as their dwelling place, could become creators of new values, could embrace amor fati, the eternal recurrence, the will to power, could become Übermensch, not in the sense of being superior to others, but in being faithful to life itself. And here's the paradox. It is precisely by going through nihilism that one can overcome it. By despairing fully, by feeling the disorientation of God's death, by recognizing the emptiness of mediocrity. Only then can you be strong enough to affirm life. Only then can you say yes. This is why Nietzsche did not fear nihilism as much as he feared mediocrity. Nihilism can be overcome. Mediocrity is harder because it hides the problem. But if you have felt the abyss, if you have asked the terrible questions, you are already closer to his path than the last man ever will be. This is not an easy philosophy. It is not meant to soothe you. It is meant to burn, to unsettle, to demand. Nietzsche himself suffered, broke, lived in torment. He was not a cheerful optimist. He was a seismograph of despair. But through that despair, he offered something like salvation, not Christian, not Buddhist, not Schopenhauerian resignation. A pagan salvation, the embrace of life, the affirmation of earth, the creation of new values. Stay with me, because now we have reached the threshold. We have walked through nihilism. We have seen despair, disorientation, mediocrity. And now Nietzsche places the question in your hands. Will you settle, or will you create? Will you blink, or will you affirm? Will you be the last man, or something more? The choice is terrifying, but it is yours. And it is precisely in the terror that freedom lives. So here we are, standing at the edge of Nietzsche's vision. Behind us lie the ruins of the old world. Despair, disorientation, mediocrity. Ahead of us lies the question of what it means to overcome nihilism. And Nietzsche doesn't hand us a neat formula. He doesn't leave us a 10-step plan. He leaves us a challenge. Can you love your life? Can you love it so completely that you would want it again and again, for all eternity? That is the weight of eternal recurrence. That is the measure of strength. But let's be honest, most people cannot carry that weight. Most people blink. Most people settle. Most people look for comfort, for distraction, for the little blanket of the last man. And maybe that's enough for them. But Nietzsche asks more. He dares us to rise above, to create new values where the old ones have collapsed. He dares us to become the Übermensch, the overman, the higher human, the one who does not need illusions to give life meaning, because he is strong enough to give it meaning himself. Think about that. For centuries, humans looked outward for meaning, to the gods, to the heavens, to moral codes handed down from on high. Nietzsche says, that age is over. God is dead, the heavens are empty, and the old codes are broken. So where does meaning come from now? From you. From me. From the individual strong enough to create values, to carve purpose out of chaos, to sing yes to life even in the face of suffering. This is why Nietzsche is so radical. He doesn't replace God with another idol. He doesn't say, here, worship this instead. He smashes every idol, even the comforting ones. And in the silence that follows, he tells you, now it's your turn. Create. Affirm. Live so deeply that your very existence becomes its own justification. That's why he writes with fire, with urgency, with hammer blows. He wanted to shock us awake, to make us realize that the stakes are nothing less than life itself. Because here's the truth. If we cannot create meaning, if we cannot affirm life, we collapse back into nihilism. And nihilism is not just a philosophical puzzle. It's the sickness of our age. You can see it everywhere, in the endless consumption, in the addiction to distraction, in the shallow comforts we call happiness. The last man is alive and well, blinking in the glow of his screen. Nietzsche's warning echoes. If we do not rise, if we do not become more, we will sink. We will live small, we will live shallow, and we will call it good. But deep down, we will know. We will feel the abyss beneath our comforts, and we will fear to look at it. That is the tragedy of the last man. Not that he suffers, but that he no longer dares. And so Nietzsche offers us a choice. Not an easy one, not a comfortable one, but a real one. Either accept the abyss and let it paralyze you, or accept the abyss and dance upon it. Either despair and retreat, or create and affirm. Either blink or blaze. The Übermensch is not some faraway superhero. He is a possibility within us. He is the person who dares to say yes when the world says no. The one who takes suffering and turns it into strength. The one who looks at eternal recurrence and says, yes, again, forever. That is greatness. That is life affirmation. That is the overcoming of nihilism. And here's where Nietzsche becomes strangely hopeful. He believed that nihilism was not the end, but a beginning. That only by going through it, only by facing the death of God, the emptiness of our comforts, the temptation of despair, can we become strong enough to create something new. Nihilism is the gateway. On the other side lies the possibility of a new kind of human being, one faithful to the earth, one who loves fate, one who lives without illusions and yet overflows with affirmation. Listen closely. This is not about philosophy textbooks. This is about you, about how you live, about how you face loss, struggle, suffering, about whether you run from it or whether you affirm it, about whether you blink like the last man or whether you rise like the Übermensch. Every choice you make, every struggle you embrace or avoid, is your answer to Nietzsche's question, do you love your life? Think of the times you've wanted to turn away, to wish things had been different. That's natural. But Nietzsche whispers, amor fati. Love your fate. Not just endure it. Love it. Love even the scars, the heartbreak, the failures. Because they are yours. Because they are life. Because without them, you would not be who you are. And if you can say yes to that, yes even to the hardest moments, then you are already walking the path beyond nihilism. And here's the paradox. The more you embrace suffering, the more you embrace struggle, the more alive you become. Because happiness, Nietzsche says, is not comfort. Happiness is overcoming resistance. Happiness is growth. Happiness is power over yourself. The will to power. That's what drives life forward. That's what transforms chaos into creation. That's what turns despair into strength. So what now? We've traced the path. Despair, disorientation, mediocrity, and finally, the possibility of overcoming. Nietzsche leaves us with the heaviest question. Will you love your life enough to want it again and again? That's not a question for philosophers in ivory towers. That's a question for you. Tonight, right now. If you can face that question honestly, if you can walk through the ruins without blinking, if you can laugh at the abyss instead of shrinking from it, then you are already closer to Nietzsche's vision. You are already beginning to overcome nihilism. You are already becoming more. And maybe that's the point. Not to reach a final destination, not to settle into easy answers, but to live as if life itself were the answer. To affirm, to create, to love your fate, to become who you are. So, as we close this journey, remember, nihilism is not the end. It is the threshold. On the other side lies the challenge of the Übermensch, the love of fate, the eternal recurrence. It is not easy. It is not safe. But it is real. And it is the only way to truly live. You listened until the end. That already puts you ahead of the last man. But here's the real test. Will you just move on, or will you leave a trace of your thoughts? Comment below. Tell me if you blink, or if you dare to say yes. And subscribe, because the abyss always has another story waiting.